Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Terence, and thank you, ICAEA, for having me. Between 2008 and 2013, I was project manager for a test for commercial airline pilots called the English Test for Aviation, or the ETA. And in this presentation, I'm going to tell the story of the ETA, and I will cover the following: how the ETA was developed, the business model, an overview of the challenges the ETA faced, and a snapshot of the state of the art of aviation language testing today. But before I begin, some caveats. Firstly, all I'm doing is sharing a history, and based on that history, some observations on aviation language testing. Secondly, like many others, I have a genuine concern with the state of aviation language testing today. I'm going to be critical in my presentation, but the regulators and the test service providers I refer to will remain anonymous. Thirdly, when I refer to test quality in my presentation, I mean validity and reliability expressed in terms of established practice in the field of language testing. Okay, let's get started. The ETA was developed jointly by two organisations, the flight training organisation Oxford Aviation Academy and the aviation English service provider Emery, for whom I worked as co-director until 2013. For clarity, Latitude is now the sole owner of the ETA. To explain the test briefly, it took about 35 minutes to complete, was delivered by two examiners, a subject matter expert and an English language expert, and it had three parts: a radio telephony role play, an integrated listening and speaking task, and the now standard describe the picture and follow-up discussion. At the time, ICAO guidance for test service providers was as follows. So the ETA was developed using standard procedures in test construction with a view to honouring this ICAO guidance. And so here's a timeline of our development process. In 2008-2009, with the support of Dr. Rita Green, we developed the test and task specifications, we piloted our tasks, and we developed a complete test battery. In 2010, OAA received UK CAA approval. Note that they received approval before trials had been conducted. In 2010, we also conducted test trials in the UK and in Russia, and after the trials, Dr. Ute Noch of the University of Melbourne analysed our trial data. And that spring, I presented a peer-reviewed poster presentation on this work at the ILTA Language Testing Research Colloquium at Cambridge University. Later in 2010, we ran an expert judgment session with 32 independent experts, the data from which were published, along with a history of test development and the results of test trials, in a report that was freely available for download from our website. And I believe Emery was one of two organisations in the world ever to have published information about the performance of its test in the public domain. In November 2010, test centres were set up, and by 2011, we had 4 running in Europe, Africa, and Asia. In November 2011, after nearly 3 years of work and around 144,000 euros of investment, we submitted the ETA to the newly opened ICAO endorsement service, and after an agonizing wait, The conditions of the endorsement were for further trials and some adjustment to the tasks and specifications. So we agreed to continue to work on the test. In May, with Dr. Luke Harding from Lancaster University, an improvement plan was developed, and we submitted the improvement plan to ICAO, which was accepted in the July. And we established a long-term relationship with Lancaster, which continues today, a relationship through which master's students use our test data to investigate quality. So the ETA had climbed the mountain. We had been through all of these stages, and the summit was in sight. And now to business. The price point for testing at the time was something like this. So the ETA was priced well inside the average fee. In terms of sales and candidature, competitors were reporting figures like this. In order to recover development costs, the ETA needed approximately 3,500 candidates. Surely this was the recipe for success. We had a good test. We had a regulatory advantage. It had access to market via OAA's global network of training centres. We had realistic commercial targets, and we had some great potential customers. But there were obstacles. Firstly, the regulatory obstacles. In spite of ICAO recognition, you still need National Aviation Authority approval, which was sometimes a lengthy and very expensive process. For example, there was interest from a national airline in the Middle East, but the regulator required fees and a 2-day UK site inspection, the cost of which came to a staggering £10,000 and included business class travel and 4-star accommodation for the inspectors. This cost was prohibitive. In 2 key markets in Europe, the regulators were unable to approve the test because they had existing contracts with test service providers, effectively creating a monopoly. Quality did not even enter the conversation. In one large ICAO member state, we had a brilliant local partner with a network of 6 test centres, and we had 2 large airlines on board. But in spite of ICAO endorsement, the regulator simply would not engage with us, preferring instead to use its own test, a test whose validity was at best questionable and reliability completely unknown. And we had the same experience with regulators in 2 large ICAO member states. In both states, language proficiency was regularly featuring in the national media. In one case, newspapers reporting the pilot community's serious dissatisfaction with testing services, and in the other, newspaper reports of the concern about the language level of licensed pilots. And in spite of this turmoil, neither regulator would talk to us about using an ICAO-endorsed test. ICAO set up the recognition service to support regulators in selecting quality tests, and yet our endorsement was having no meaningful impact at all in our conversations with regulators. The best any regulator gave us was, "Well done, that's very nice." We even received an email from the head of personnel licensing from one regulator that stated that ICAO does not endorse tests and how dare you falsely promote your product. Another regulator simply said, "Only conditional? What's wrong with it?" And while some regulators were rejecting the only ICAO-endorsed test, others were handing the responsibility to flight examiners, issuing a 1-page guidance document as a substitute for valid and reliable testing. One regulator explained very honestly that they didn't have any of the expertise necessary to evaluate a language test, and yet the fee for the first 3 years of approval is approximately €10,000 for a service which is basically an exercise in box ticking and completely ignores the basic and fundamental evaluation of test quality. When I suggested that they adopt the ICAO recognition service as a workaround, the response was a firm no. What about the commercial barriers? I've got about 3 minutes left to go, so I'm going to move very quickly. So some of the commercial barriers. Some potential airlines were scared of the test. It's going to give us low results. We cannot fail our people. Others said, why are you using 2 examiners? That doubles our human resource cost. Surely we can just use 1, or even none. Your competitor is half the price. A competitor with claims for validity and reliability. In one European member state, the regulator gives it to the aero clubs who charge their people €10 per test. €10 for a safety critical, valid and reliable assessment. And we had maintenance issues. We'll talk more about these during the workshops. I want to cut to the chase a little bit here. So essentially in 2012, the ETA closed for business. There was no justification for continuing to invest in a test that couldn't gain market traction because of the regulatory obstacles and the commercial barriers. Interestingly, another fully ICAO recognized test closed its doors for business last year. And I know it was a quality test because I'd witnessed firsthand the cruel scrutiny that ICAO apply in the endorsement or recognition process. We know what the regulations are. They all refer to evidence for validity and reliability. And scholars and industry associations say exactly the same thing as a matter of professional responsibility. Here are some statistics for you. This was a count I did this month. Here are some more stats. That is a concern. What can we do as a community to improve the quality of aviation language testing? We're going to try and answer some of those questions in the workshops later. Thank you very much.